Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
I'm your host, Richard Costello, and today I'm pleased to introduce Jennica Palecek. An industry rising star, Jennica is currently a commercial real estate advisor at Colliers Vancouver, specializing in office leasing. A graduate of the Beedie School of Business, Jennica has a double major in business and economics, and prior to starting her brokerage career, she completed internships in finance and held roles in retail banking and property management. With a passion for advancing diversity, Jennica is actively involved in Colliers North America Women's Council and actively serves on the boards for the Canadian Mental Health Association and Big Brothers Big Sisters. In our conversation today, we'll dive into what it means to be a commercial real estate advisor or broker, how to set yourself apart and build a personal brand within a large organisation. We'll hear Jennica's perspective on the office market and learn more about her commitment to charitable causes. Jennica, a big welcome to you and thank you for joining me on the Real Estate Careers Podcast.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me, Richard.
So, one of the goals of this podcast is to showcase the different career paths in the industry. And while many of our past guests have worked in brokerage, you're the first to share insights into what this career path looks like. So commercial real estate brokers are a very important part of the industry, but for any of our listeners who may be unfamiliar, can you start by explaining what they do, what you do?
Yeah, of course. Commercial real estate brokers, they really serve as a strategic liaison between landlords and tenants, or in other words, owners of commercial real estate and businesses who occupy these spaces. Their job is ultimately to get the best deal for their client, and their exact roles and responsibilities might change depending on which side they're representing. When representing a landlord or an owner, brokers will leverage market insights to position properties competitively, craft marketing tactics to attract prospective tenants, and handle negotiations to, of course, secure favorable agreements. And on the other hand, when representing tenants or businesses, brokers will immerse themselves in understanding the nuances of each client, their industry, current position, and where they want to go. And from this, they align their real estate needs with their business objectives and, of course, on the best financial terms. You'll help them from first figuring out what exactly they need, find properties for them, and handle negotiations on these.
Okay, amazing. And your role at the moment, you focus on the tenant side of the transaction and specialize in office properties.
Yes, yeah. My managing director is going to be thrilled when he hears that because he's always stressing the value of specialization. My focus is on guiding office occupiers or businesses through the office real estate journey in Vancouver and also a little bit in Burnaby. I'll help businesses on their office relocations, renewals, or disposition through subleasing or termination. And as an office tenant rep, I dive into understanding each business's needs, their challenges, and opportunities, and then align their real estate to solve for this. One thing that I've also done is do several transactions in certain industries like tech, mining, and professional services. And by doing so, I can offer insights tailored to that industry and share what other peers are doing. I found law firms are always curious what's worked and what hasn't worked for others. And it's important they're aware of this so they can make the most informed decisions, especially if they're going to be committing to, a multi-million-dollar 10-year commitment.
So what would be a good example, perhaps, of one of the transactions that you've been involved with that highlights the value you can bring to a business?
Yeah, there was a local law firm whose lease was expiring in about a year and a half. I knew there were a few tenants in the building that'd be leaving that year, and I suspected that the landlord would most likely be looking for some security given they have some upcoming vacancy. And so I called the law firm and we ended up negotiating the renewal a year and a half early. Through this, we were able to help them relocate within the building and expand to a larger space, get a fully built out space custom to their requirements at no cost, and pay very, very competitive rates, very below market. On the other side, the landlord was able to get 10 years of lease security from a great tenant. And I've since inquired on this building, and they're no longer offering the same rates or incentives. And that build out alone would have cost over $1 million. So overall, we ended up saving the tenant over $1 million in the build out and at least a couple $100,000 on their rental rates. And it was a really great win-win story, and the importance of timing the market and using a tenant rep broker to really help you best strategize this.
Okay, fantastic. So are there different types of leases? Perhaps you can explain the key differences.
Yeah, of course. So I guess from a high level perspective, there's two that you typically would really see. We typically see triple net leases in Vancouver, which is essentially where your net rent is a price per square foot that's negotiable. And then you have your additional rent, which is a fixed price per square foot. The additional rent number includes the building's property taxes, strata insurance, and common amenities. And sometimes these amenities will include a boardroom, gym, and sometimes also your hydro, for instance. There's an estimated number for the additional rent that is given at the start of the year and then reconciled later once finalized numbers come in. And this reconciliation is normally very marginal. It can either be a credit to the tenant if actual numbers come in below estimates, or a debit as well. And this ensures that the landlords aren't out of pocket when their expenses such as property taxes or their operating costs rise. So this is typically the preferred way that it's structured by a landlord and what we see. And the other main one that you'd see is a gross lease, which is essentially just one total monthly number that the tenant pays, and this does not fluctuate.
How are brokers typically compensated?
I can't speak to all asset classes, but I can speak to office, especially tenant rep. And so brokers are typically compensated by the landlord, at least in Vancouver. It's interesting because this really does vary depending on which part of the world you're transacting in. There's one client of mine, I helped them in Burnaby, and I've now worked with them across Canada, US, and Europe. And it all really varies. Canada is a flat rate paid by the landlord. US is a percentage of the rental rate paid by the landlord. And then Europe varies, but it's paid by the tenant. So in Vancouver, typically always paid by the landlord and a flat rate.
So Jennica, how did you first become aware that this might be a career path for you?
Yeah, I was working in finance in New York City and Brazil, and I was helping small, medium enterprises or startups on their growth strategies. And we would essentially craft marketing reports, pitch decks, meet with bankers on their behalf, and ultimately help their product or service expand. And one project that I worked on in New York City was a consumer goods product, which we ultimately helped get into Trader Joe's and Whole Foods across the US. It was huge for exposure, revenue growth, and market presence. And it was really, really exciting. I found it really fulfilling working closely with such ambitious and creative executives and really helping them grow their business. It was challenging and no day was the same, but that was really the beauty of it. And so I came back to Vancouver and I knew I wanted to do something similar. My family was here, and I ended up kind of falling into commercial real estate with Colliers in property management. It's funny because the part of the job that most people hated was the most rewarding for me. In property management, the main time that you call clients and when you're really, working in a client-facing role is when things are going bad. An elevator's broken, there's a flood in the building, a tenant's late on rent, you name it. There were a few tenants during COVID who were late on rent due to unfortunate, business challenges. And it was really exciting to call them, learn more about their business, and problem solve as a team. And one example would be, for instance, if a tenant was unable to pay rent for a month or two, instead of terminating them, we'd extend their lease out by the same time period. So the tenant could stay in business and the landlord could also retain the same lease revenues, which again, great win-win. And I, to be honest, didn't really know about going into brokerage, but a leader in property management at the time, God bless her soul, pulled me into her office and said, "Hey, you're incredibly keen and ambitious. We love you. You're doing a great job, but you should really check out brokerage. You like client-facing roles. You're a problem solver, and I can just tell you want to be able to own something, so to speak." And so I met with a few brokers at different shops, and eventually met with one guy, Colin Scarlett. And I was immediately inspired by him and really resonated with who he was and what he was about. And I started working with him since and have absolutely loved it.
Just to go back, you mentioned working in finance in New York City and Brazil. Like, how did that come about? That sounds quite exotic.
Yeah, Brazil, they were both such different experiences, which I think was great. Completely different work cultures. Brazil was my first one, and it was actually through university, through a referral from a professor who I was in one of their finance courses, and they needed a contract role for the summer. So I ended up working there, and that was amazing. The people were incredible, and learned a ton. And then from there, I kind of leveraged that and started doing my CFA and a couple other courses, and then cold emailed. I forget what it was. It was like 120 people in New York, and asked if they happened to have any jobs coming up for the summer of the following year. And, got a lot of no's and a lot of no replies, and that's fine. And eventually ended up connecting with a couple people we met with. And then one of them ended up hiring me on. So it was kind of really connecting with people and cold outreach and just staying on top of opportunities.
So these were like internship sort of opportunities that you were pursuing?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think we'll probably come back on to talking a bit more about Colin later on and the influence that he's had on your career. But brokerage is well known to be a very competitive industry. So how did Colliers set you up for success as you're starting out?
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely known to be very competitive. And, I think it can sometimes be known as a bit of a cutthroat industry. People think that's law and finance, which I can see since they're also client facing and high pressure. But when you add essentially running your own business and being full commission, it takes it to a whole other level. It's definitely not for everyone, but I personally love this part of the job because it does always keep you on your toes. And if it wasn't challenging, I'd probably get bored, which is all the reason why it's so important to set your employees up for success. And Colliers did a really great job at that and skewed my expectations for what onboarding looks like in the best of ways. Colliers naturally has a very collaborative work environment, so it was always easy to ask questions or grab coffees with people in the company. And we had an onboarding course, meetings over several weeks, maybe even months, that went over all our resources, teams, how to use different systems, and they were all very engaging. And I remember walking in on my first day and my calendar's packed for the first month with meetings with different executives, younger brokers, teams from marketing or research to communication. So it was very immersive, very supportive, and it really helped you get a strong grasp of what Colliers is, what your team looks like. And, I'm still even digging into all the resources to this day. But they definitely set you up for success very well. Yeah,
that's great to hear. And what would you say are the benefits of working for a globally recognized business?
Yeah, I have to say, I've definitely tapped into some of the incredible resources because of working with a global business. For me, a really big thing is being data-driven and community-oriented, and being part of Colliers has allowed me to do that. As Canada's largest commercial real estate brokerage, I know I'm tooting our horn here a little bit, but we have almost 500 brokers across the country. And because of that, we have more brokers and boots on the ground than any other competitors and have, more data at our fingertips. It always impresses me just how advanced our data and research is. And it makes it incredibly seamless if I'm meeting with a prospective client or preparing for a pitch to get all the most notable and relevant data in a second. So because of our global footprint, a few of us formed what we call the Emerging Office Leaders Council. It's a group of up and coming office brokers like myself from all corners of North America. One broker represents each major market, and we've traveled to Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, and to meet with developers, landlords, and clients, and ultimately bring back all sorts of valuable knowledge and insights to our clients at home. And one of the best things is honestly being able to pick up the phone and connect with anyone, anywhere. It's pretty incredible how it can make the world feel so much smaller in the best way possible.
Yeah, fantastic. I think one of the interesting aspects of your role is that while you're working for this global brand, you still, it sounds like, have the freedom to create your own personal brand within it. So what has been your approach to this?
Yeah, I have to give all and any credit to Colin, who I know I mentioned earlier, who, if you don't know, you absolutely should. I have the utmost respect for him, his business acumen, and the powerhouse brand that he's built. When I first joined Colliers, I closely observed how Colin articulated his identity, his why, and his unique value proposition. And Colin's specialization, in office tenant representation is legendary, particularly in his work with law firms. He's worked with over 83% of them and traveled to 25 cities studying their industry, which has allowed him to truly understand their industry inside and out, and sometimes even more than some of the lawyers themselves. And because of this approach, he's able to service his clients better than any generalist broker would really be able to. And so I wanted to take, a few pages from his book. And so for my own branding, there's the professional side, so who I work with and what I do. I've immersed myself in different industry panels and led networking events, authored research reports, and also curated a monthly newsletter in the tech, mining, and professional service space. And because of that, it allows me to really continuously learn about their industry, connect with people who I might work with, and meet like-minded people who are interested in the same topics that I am. And I also really believe that, I am not just here to handle your real estate needs. I'm really genuinely invested in understanding your business, your motivations, and your goals. And whether it's introducing you to top recruiters for talent acquisition or connecting you with venture capitalists for funding opportunities, I really want to provide holistic support and actually be a partner long-term. So being part of this community helps me ultimately serve my clients better.
Just to touch on the office sector for a moment. So I understand Vancouver is doing significantly better than other markets throughout North America, but I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of, like general trends.
Vancouver loves to flaunt that it's doing well. It's interesting seeing, the different perspective on this. As of last year, Vancouver entered its first tenants market in 18 years, which is a massive change and a crazy headline. For context, a tenants market for office is typically anything above a 10% vacancy rate. And a vacancy rate is essentially how many units are available or vacant. This means there's more supply in the market than we've seen in almost 2 decades. This is particularly frightening for many landlords who aren't used to having much, if any, vacancy in their portfolios. However, relative to the rest of Canada or the US, we still have one of the tightest office markets. And so to no one's surprise, we're seeing a decent amount of downsizing. But to be honest, I haven't personally seen anything drastic, like companies going from a full floor to fully remote. I think it's agreed that there's benefits to both in office and work from home. In office benefits, are typically culture, training, or ramping up new employees, productivity. It's easier to knock on someone's door for a quick question versus going back and forth over email, and really talent retention. And I actually recently worked with a high growth startup who shared that their ramp up period for their sales team was 30% quicker when they were in office, which is obviously huge if you can get your revenue drivers working quicker and more efficiently. But of course, work from home has a place and offers, flexibility, sometimes less cost because you're not commuting. So every company needs different things and has different priorities. So there's no one size fits all. It really depends on the industry and company culture.
And other than competitive lease rates, what are some of the main features or services that your clients are looking for when they consider an office move? And how important are the environmental sustainability ratings of a building in their sort of ultimate decision?
That's a good question, and kind of touching on the office market right now. People are really trying to figure out how to reduce barriers for their employees to return to the office. And one of the biggest barriers, which I just mentioned, is typically the commute time and the cost of commuting. So we're seeing a lot of businesses have a heavy focus on being very close to transit. I mean, Waterfront SkyTrain station is probably your best just because it provides access to the C-Bus, West Coast Express, and all the different SkyTrain lines, as well as having parking within for employees who maybe don't feel comfortable transiting in or who are further where it's just not as easy to, SkyTrain in quickly. So I think really being close to transit is number one on everyone's list right now. I think after that, we're seeing amenities become a huge thing. So boardrooms and gyms, just something that really makes the employee experience that much more engaging, because now you're competing against someone's home. So you really, if someone can be at their home in their comfort with no cost, you essentially need to incentivize why someone would get in their car and drive to the office. So having the culture in your office, having a gym that your employees can use, having a boardroom and different things that really help the space come alive or is becoming increasingly more important. And then in terms of ESG, we're definitely seeing that talked about a lot more, typically more from larger corporate mandates. Those companies do have ESG goals themselves that they need to meet for their board of directors. And so sometimes they'll be looking at certain buildings to be able to help with this. So it's definitely becoming more common. And we're seeing a lot of landlords, I know Quadreal, 1075, Arthur Erickson building, and a couple others have worked towards being carbon neutral. So definitely becoming a huge, huge trend.
Are you allowed to have favorite buildings, Jennica? So.
I don't know if I'm allowed, but no. I definitely have. I mean, they're all so unique, so it really depends on what someone's looking for. For amenities, I think it's safe to say, I think it's objective, I hope, cross fingers, that, the Oxford portfolio and Hudson Pacific properties, their portfolios, which each comprise of essentially a complex made up of a multitude of buildings, really have done well at that amenity aspect. They have, dog parks and all these different fitness centers and, a brewery that I know Hudson just put in, and really something where employees feel like they're coming to be part of a community. They're not coming just to the office. And so I think they've done really, really well in that. And then there's also other buildings that are a bit more historic or, have other pros to them. So it depends what you're looking for. It really also depends on the industry as well. I think probably tech would gravitate more towards that Oxford or Hudson Pacific kind of amenitized space versus maybe a professional service firm might look for something different. So it depends who you are.
Can I assume that Cadillac Fairview aren't a client of yours, Jennica? Because I'm in 885 West Georgia. I'd argue that our gym, not that I want more people to kind of come and use it, but it's a great facility because you've got the whole Pacific Center, Waterfront Center, and the tennis court as well, which
yes.
The secret tennis court.
Yes, they've done a great job at that. The rooftop tennis court, they do a really, really good job too at taking care of all of their tenants. I know we used to be in a Cadillac Fairview building, and it would be a random Friday, and they would have, ice cream downstairs for tenants, or during the winter time, they would have a pop-up brewery or pop-up bar. And so Cadillac does a really, really good job at that, and little, tenant gifts around the holidays. So definitely amazing landlord. You've picked very well.
One of it was my most popular LinkedIn post of all time, which is it's kind of embarrassing that this was the one. I took a photograph of the Christmas tree and put a challenge out there to. Anyway, I said that the Cadillac Fairview Christmas tree in 885 was top of the Christmas tree charts, and if someone can challenge that, then feel free to post a picture. And anyway, it got the most likes and shares, but no major challenges. I thought it would have stiffer competition, but anyway, they do a really good job. So yeah, nerding out on lobby decorations, but so I mentioned this to you when we went for coffee, but when I look at your profile on LinkedIn, and now that I've got to know you a little, I see someone who is really passionate about building community and helping others. And I think it's rare to see someone at your stage in your career be so active in things like board positions with various charities. So can you tell us some of the groups you've been involved with, and where does the motivation for doing this come from?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. I really appreciate that. I do want to touch on the point that you mentioned about my involvement being rare for someone at my age or stage. I think a lot of people believe they need to wait until they're a CEO or have a certain net worth or at a certain place in their life, perhaps with more stability and time to give back. And I really don't believe there's ever a right time. When people are young, you think maybe you're not ready or you're not good enough. Then you get to be maybe middle-aged and you have a family or a mortgage and other responsibilities and think, now you just don't have time. And then finally, by the time you're perhaps, quote, ready, your life's flown by and now you think maybe it's too late. And so if you're listening and want to get involved, I'd say just do it. You won't regret it, I promise. And if you do, well, you can email me and tell me I completely messed up and owe you lunch. But I promise there's no right time. So I think whenever you're wanting to get involved, that's when you should just put your mind to it. For the organizations that I have been involved with, I currently serve on the boards for Canadian Mental Health Association, which supports mental health in 330 communities across Canada, and Big Brothers Big Sisters, which supports youth through their growing years. Both have very close ties to me. Mental health has always been an important cause for me, and my dad was previously involved with Big Brothers as a mentor, and to this day, he has a strong relationship with his mentee. I saw that bond and how impactful it was and wanted to support this. I also think it's really important to give back to the next generation. They're, our future leaders after all. So I'm a firm believer that, you can always have an impact no matter your age or your stage. And then for where I guess the motivation comes from, I know it sounds really corny, but most of the drive probably really comes from my mom, and then also being motivated by impact. When I was younger, my mom was always really involved in the community and always giving back. Every holiday, Valentine's Day, Christmas, any holiday you can think of, she would handwrite cards and curate gift packages for anyone in the community, from teachers to mailmen. And I'll never forget going to elementary school and telling kids about the card and the spa package my mom made for the garbage man, and people looking at me like I was absolutely crazy. And I just thought everyone did this. And so I'm also, I think it came from that, and also being very impact driven and, being able to walk away one day and say that you helped a cause, even, if it's in a very small way or touch someone's life. Again, even if it's in a small way, I'll be happy. That's all I really need. And, maybe a couple good vacations thrown in there throughout my lifetime, and then we'll be good.
Amazing. Yeah, like you've been very intentional in volunteering in a board capacity as well. So for anyone who might be unfamiliar, like what does this mean? And perhaps if you can share, like what's your commitment?
Yeah, of course. And thank you. It might sound crazy. I knew I wanted to serve on the board of directors for the Canadian Mental Health Association for 4 to 5 years before actually joining, and was very intentional with ensuring that I could eventually join their team. I applied to serve on the board for a smaller local board, which also supports mental health, and was able to learn about governance boards while wearing many hats and supporting the cause through this. And for those years, I soaked up as much as possible and put my hand up for any committees, and ultimately ended up joining the board for Canadian Mental Health Association a few years later. In terms of commitment, this really varies between boards and how involved you are. Board meetings can be monthly or quarterly and typically last a few hours. And you'll also usually serve on a committee that will meet separately, and you'll have additional tasks to do from this committee. Again, committee meetings may be monthly or quarterly and last for a few hours, really depending on how much work is in progress. And there's typically always a finance committee, which is normally led by someone in accounting who oversees budgets. For instance, a partner with KPMG oversees our finance team at the Canadian Mental Health Association. And then there's typically also a governance committee, which overlooks policies, fundraising committee, which helps raise funds, and a few others, which vary depending on the board and what's needed. And so in total, I'd say each board commitment is probably maybe minimum 10 hours per month, just depending on the month as well.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not insignificant, that's for sure. And like how did you go about getting on these boards, and maybe like advice for other people? And then when you think about the skills that you bring forward, what are the skills that you bring forward to the board, and what do you get out of it?
Yeah, it might sound might sound crazy, but it was actually through cold email. So I guess that's the trend of some of my career so far with New York and then the Canadian Mental Health Association. I don't know. I swear by it. I looked at what my values were, and supporting mental health, women in business, and really just strengthening our community was at the core of the impact I wanted to have. And so similar to my experience of joining the Canadian Mental Health Association's board, I think it's great if you can serve on a smaller local board before serving on a larger one to really understand how a governance board operates and perhaps touch on more areas than you may be able to with a larger one. I typically always sit on the finance committees because of my background in finance, as well as the fundraising committees because I work very closely with our community businesses and local governments, so it can help from that perspective. I also previously served on the Outreach Council with the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade and spearheaded events between the Board of Trade and then Habitat for Humanity, Greater Vancouver Food Bank, and Salvation Army. And so typically also help out on event logistics. So if they have an annual gala, golf tournament, or other events, I'll typically take part in this as I'm familiar with a lot of the logistics or venues and partners.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, good for you. It is a lot, and you keep a lot of plates spinning in the air, so very impressive. Jennica, if we were to record a follow-up episode in 10 years' time, how do you see your career in brokerage evolving, and what goals do you have for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I love commercial real estate. It impacts our community and really connects you to it. So in 10 years' time, I hope that we're still talking about commercial real estate because, nothing excites me more than walking down the street and, boring my friends and my family and telling them the stories behind certain tenants and buildings and, a new development that's coming up on the corner of the street here. And so hopefully continuing to grow in commercial real estate and maybe touch on a bit more sales as well. And then also, I work with a lot of startups in my current role over the past couple of years. And then I worked with them also in New York and Brazil. And really think that they're kind of the future for us. They might be the next Google, one of them, you never know. So I really believe in supporting them, especially female founders. So ideally would like to also get involved in investing in female founders in the future. So combining this passion for supporting startups and, our future leaders with also supporting women.
I guess if any of our listeners had questions or wanted to reach out, how might they do that? Is LinkedIn or is it through your Colliers contact?
Yeah, the good news about brokers are they're probably the easiest person to track down. Cell phone, email, everything's listed on there. Just not the SIN number. That's probably the only thing not listed online. So if you want to get in contact, LinkedIn is great. Honestly, email, cell phone, I'm always available and I'm always happy to chat or answer any questions.
Jennica, thank you for sharing your story and being a part of the podcast.
Thank you so much. I've listened to a couple of your episodes now and I'm very excited to now be part and join this conversation with you. So hopefully we're doing that podcast in 10 years time and seeing how accurate it is.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again and speak to you soon, Jennica.
Thanks so much, Richard.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.